Hi, this is Julie with Beadaholique, and in this video I'm going to show you how to bead weave fringe, and that is what you see right here. It's this fun edging. It has a lot of great movement to it. I'm going to show you how to create it. So this is my little sample piece that I did up ahead of time. So the top is peyote, and then the fringe uses the same size beads, which are 10-0 Miyuki Delicas, to do the main part of the fringe. And then I've got a bugle bead here, which is a 9mm, and these little turning beads down here are 15-0 Delicas. So peyote and then the fringe. And I've already created a piece of peyote that I'm going to add fringe to, and I just did a striped pattern. You can really do whatever pattern you want. And if you don't know how to make this piece here, we do have other videos on Beadaholique.com showing you how to do peyote stitch, herringbone, a lot of other bead weaving stitches that would work well for adding fringe to. In terms of the supplies you're going to need, well, the sky's really the limit with fringe. I like to use a lot of the beads that I use already in my bead woven piece that I'm starting with. So I'm going to use, again, Miyuki 10-0 Delicas in the colors from my main piece. For this particular piece of fringe, I've pulled some 3mm bugles and then the 15-0 turning beads. You really can use whatever you want. If you use the beads that are the same size as in your main beadwork, you'll see that they're all going to lay very nice and even together. If you use larger beads, they might end up kicking out the fringe a little bit because they're going to take up more space between the rows. And if you use smaller ones, you're just going to have longer gaps between each dangle. And I'm going to show you how to do this little zigzag pattern, which I think is really fun. In terms of the thread you're going to be using, I strongly recommend using NYMO for a fringe. I usually use Fireline or Wildfire for my bead weaving, which is great, and that's what I did here. And it's nice because it's really stiff and strong. So you see how solid that really is for a thread. But NYMO is a lot looser. It's got a lot more give to it and a lot more movement. And that's what we really want for the fringe. We want it to be able to just dangle and move about. And then you're going to need a needle and you're going to need a pair of scissors. So I'm going to cut off a length of thread here. And I'm just doing a sample swatch, so I'm not doing a whole project here, but you'd want to make sure that you have a length of thread that you're comfortable working with. You can always add more later. That's not a problem with fringe, so you don't feel like you have to start with as much as you're going to end up needing. But I always say start with whatever length you're comfortable, and I'm usually comfortable with about 4 feet or so. I'm going to place a stopper bead on the end of my thread, leaving a tail of about 6 inches. I want to have that tail long enough that I can go back at the end and thread a needle back onto it and work my tail into my beadwork. To begin, you're going to want to take your needle with the stopper bead attached, go through the first bead that you want your fringe to start from, and come out in the same direction that you want your fringe to be hanging. You'll see what we have here. So I want my fringe to be coming down this way. So I'm exiting that bead, and now I'm going to create my fringe. And I think the pattern I'm going to want for my fringe, and I like to lay out my beads, is I think I'm going to want some of these little cream colored ones, followed by the blue, followed by the red, and then I think I'll add the bugles. Probably going to come back and do another little segment of red, and then another little bugle, and then my turning beads. So I like to do this when I'm making fringe. I like to set out my fringe pattern in front of me so I can just pick them up in a row. So I'm going to start with one of my little cream beads. I'll do one of each of these. And go ahead and see what that looks like. Okay, so it's not a very long fringe. I think it's going to be pretty. Maybe what I'll do is I'm going to add 2 little red beads down there before that second bugle bead. Well, let's try that. Let's actually do 2 reds, the second bugle, so that's what I've got. Now I'm going to pick up my turning beads. You always are going to need a turning bead or beads. It can be whatever you like. I just happen to like these little guys, and I've put 3 of them onto my needle, and I'm going to pull them down. So as the name suggests, we're now going to turn. So our turning beads become the end beads, as you see in this little example here. So now we want to go back up through that second bugle, or whatever bead you have as your end bead before your turning beads, and also go up through all the beads that are part of your fringe and that bead that you came out of that is secured to your beadwork, so that edge bead on your actual main piece of beadwork. Okay. Make sure those turning beads do what they're supposed to, which is turn. And you want to pull it tight so there's not a gap, but not so tight that it's stiff. This is what you don't want. You don't want it stiff like that, you want it loose. And that's why we're using the NYMO. It's also why I like to start with a starting bead stopper, so that if my tension is too tight on this side after I've done all this beading down here, I can loosen it up a little bit before I work in my tail and tie off that end of the thread. So now we need to create our second row of fringe. So we're going to just take our needle and go down through the second bead in our beadwork along the edge. Pull that stopper bead out of the way. So now we're exiting where we want to be exiting, and we're going to create our second row of fringe, and we're going to start to create this zigzag pattern. And to do that, instead of doing an identical segment of fringe, we're going to add 1 more of these cream beads to start with, and then we're going to keep everything else the same. And again, your 3 turning beads. Now we're going to turn, go back up through all our beadwork, as well as that bead we came out of. And check down here to make sure that your beads did turn properly. Sometimes they need a little bit of help. There we go. Now we're just going to jump over to the next bead. And we're going to repeat. And now instead of adding 2 here, we're going to add 3. So we're adding just 1 more each time. And back up through our line of fringe. And back up through that bead that we started from. So this is what we have so far, and you can see that there's starting to be a bit of a zigzag appearing, just a start of one side of it. And I'm going to do a few more rows here on camera, but there's not a lot of dialogue per se to tell you as I'm doing this. We're just repeating the same action, but adding 1 extra of these cream beads each time. If you're doing this at home, it doesn't have to be just a cream bead. You could have created the zigzag down here. You could have had more bugles, fewer bugles, bigger ones. There's a lot of flexibility to be had with fringe, but I'm going to do a few more here so you can really see this pattern start to develop. So this one here, I'm going to add 4 of the cream beads and then the same pattern for the rest of them. Okay, so this is what we have so far, and you can see we're really getting that diagonal look going. And I'm going to start to do just one or two going up the opposite way so you can see how that looks. And then I'm going to show you how to tie off your threads to be able to complete your fringe. So let's just continue along. And so you'll see I'm exiting the row that I want to do next. And now I can count these. I've got 7 of these cream beads. So to start going up the opposite way, we want to have 1 fewer. So I'm going to do 6. All right, so I've got 6 there on my needle, and then the same pattern repeated. I think it might be just a little bit easier to see what I'm doing if I lay this down on the table as I'm doing it. So I'm just taking my needle again and going up through all those beads and the actual edge of the beadwork as well. And you'll see that I occasionally get this little loop right here. And all you need to do to get rid of that is pull your beads down and then carefully pull your thread up. It's not a knot. It's just the fact that your stopper beads, when they did the turn, had more thread on the first part, so the going down side, there's a little gap of thread, and then you turned your beads and you went back up, and so when you pulled it tight, there was a little loop of thread. There's not a knot, it's not anything you have to undo, you just have to work with it a little bit. All right, so I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to show you how to tie off the threads. So I had 6, well first I had 7, then I had 6, now I'm going to do 5 of these little cream beads. So that's 6, we don't want that. Okay, there's 5. And let me lay it down so hopefully a little easier to see. All right, there we go. And hopefully that pattern is starting to show. All right, so it's kind of fun pairing stripes with now a chevron type design. Now I'm going to show you how to go ahead and get rid of your threads. So tie them off and incorporate them into your beadwork. So this is the same method as if you were doing any other type of bead weaving and you needed to tie off or add more thread. So we're going to go ahead and work our needle into our beadwork. And we don't want to pull too tight because remember we don't want that to be stiff, we don't want that fringe to be stiff. Okay. Now we're going to go down through our beadwork. And then back up. Just a little bit over. And through the loop we just made, so we're going to be making a knot, is what we're doing. Pull it tight so it disappears into the beadwork. Go a little further along, so again, work your needle up into your beadwork. And the one thing with fringe is it does tend to get caught when you're working with this, so just be patient. Go any direction you want to go. If you have beadwork that really does show your thread path, always make sure to just follow your thread path. Don't create a new one. Okay, I'm going to do another knot. Just work my needle in. You do that as many times as you really want to. I find 2 to 3 knots is really sufficient. And then you just go ahead and you trim off your thread. And then you would go back to this side, remove that stopper bead, rethread your needle onto your thread, and do the exact same method. Let me lay this out for you so you can see what it looks like. And that is how you make a beaded fringe.